मैं तो हाथ जोड़ के ही आपका स्वागत करूंगा, क्योंकि ना मैं लेफ्ट आउट हूँ, ना मैं राइट इन। मैं तो न्यूट्रल हूँ। नमस्ते भारत, हिंदुस्तान, इंडिया। मेरा नाम है परम लखानी और आज आप फिर एक दफ़ा जुड़े हैं मेरे साथ द यूथ माउथ पे। The Israel Palestine conflict is the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians that began in the mid 20th century. The origins to the conflict can be traced back to the Jewish immigration and sectarian conflict in the mandatory Palestine between Jews and Arabs. It has been referred to as the world's most intractable conflict, with the ongoing Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip reaching 55 years. Despite of a long-term peace process and the general reconciliation of Israel with Egypt and Jordan, Israelis and Palestinians have failed to reach a final peace agreement. The key issues are mutual recognition, borders, security, water rights, control of Jerusalem, Israeli settlements, Palestinian freedom of movement, and the Palestinian right of return. The violence of the conflict in a region rich in states of historical, cultural, and religious interests worldwide has been the object of numerous international conferences dealing with historic rights, security issues, and the human rights factor. It has been hampering tourism and general access to the areas hotly contended. Many attempts have been made to broker a two-state solution involving the creation of an independent Palestinian state alongside the State of Israel after its establishment in 1948. In 2007, the majority of both Israelis and Palestinians, according to a number of polls, preferred the two-state solution over any other solution as a means of resolving the conflict. Moreover, a majority of Jews see the Palestinians' demand of an independent state as just and thinks Israel can agree to the establishment of such a state. The majority of Palestinians and Israelis in the West Bank and Gaza Strip have expressed a presence for a two-state solution. Mutual distrust and significant disagreements are deep over basic issues, as in the reciprocal skepticism about the other side's commitment to upholding obligations in an eventual agreement. Within the Israeli and the Palestinian society, the conflict generates a wide variety of views and opinions. This highlights the deep visions which exist not only between Israelis and Palestinians but also within each society. A hallmark of the conflict has been the level of violence witnessed for virtually its entire duration. Fighting has been conducted regularly by armies, paramilitary groups, terror cells, and individuals. Casualties have been not restricted to the military, but also a large number of fatalities have been reported in the civilian population on both sides. There are prominent international actors involved in the conflict. The two parties engaged in direct negotiation are the Israeli government, currently led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Palestinian Liberal Organization, currently headed by Mohammed Abbas. The official negotiations are mediated by an international contingent known as the Quartet of Middle East, represented by a special envoy that consists of the United States, Russia, the European Union, and the United Nations. The Arab League is another important factor which has proposed an alternative peace plan. Egypt, a founding member of the Arab League, has historically been a key participant. Jordan, having relinquished its claim to the West Bank in 1988 and holding a special role in the Muslim holy shrines in Jerusalem, has also been a key participant. Since 2006, the Palestinian side has been fractured by a conflict between the two major fractions, Fatah, the traditionally dominant party, and its later electoral challenger, Hamas. After Hamas' electoral victory in 2006, the quartet conditioned future foreign assistance to the Palestinian National Authority on the future government's commitment to non-violence, recognition of the state Israel, and acceptance of previous agreements. Hamas rejected these demands, which resulted in the quartet's suspension of its foreign assistance program and the imposition of economic sanctions by the Israelis. A year later, following Hamas' seizure of power in the Gaza Strip in June 2007, the territory, officially recognized as the PA, was split between the Fatah in the West Bank and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The division of governance between the parties had effectively resulted in the collapse of bipartisan governments of the PA. However, in 2014, a Palestinian unity government composed of both Fatah and Hamas was formed. A round of peace negotiations began in July 2013, but alas was suspended in 2014. What are Israel and Palestine? Why are they fighting? Israel is the world's only Jewish state located in the east of the Mediterranean Sea. Palestinians, the Arab population that hails from the land of Israel, now controls, refer to the territory as Palestine and want to establish a state by that name on all or part of the same land. The whole conflict is based on over who gets what land and how is it controlled. Though both Jews and Arab Muslims date their claims to the land back a couple of thousand years, the current political conflict began in the early 20th century. Jews flee persecution in Europe wanted to establish a national homeland in what was then an Arab and Muslim majority territory in the Ottoman and later British Empire. The Arabs resisted, seeing the land rightfully as theirs. An early United Nations plan to give each group a part of the land failed, and Israel, along with the surrounding Arab nations, fought several wars over the territory. Today's lines largely reflect the outcome of two of these wars, one that dates back in 1948 and the second in the year 1967. The 1967 war is particularly important for this conflict as it left Israel in the control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, two territories home to a large number of Palestinian populations. Today, the West Bank is nominally controlled by Palestinian Authority and is under Israeli occupation. This comes in the form of Israeli troops who enforce Israeli security's restrictions on Palestinian movements and activities. Israeli settlers and Jews who build the ever expanding communities in the West Bank that effectively deny the land to Palestinians. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, an Islamist fundamentalist party, and is under Israeli blockade but not ground troop occupation. The primary approach to solving the conflict today is a so-called two-state solution that would establish Palestine as an independent state in Gaza and most of the West Bank, leaving the rest to Israel. Though this two-state plan is clear in theory, the two sides are still deeply divided over how to make it in practice. The alternative solution to the two-state is a one-state solution wherein all the land becomes either one big Israel or one big Palestine. Most observers think that this could cause more problems than solve, but this outcome is becoming more likely over the time for political and demographic reasons. What is Zionism? Zionism is Israel's national ideology. Zionists believe Judaism is a nationality as well as a religion, and that Jews believe and deserve in their own state in the ancestral homeland, Israel. In the same way, the French people deserve France, or the Chinese people deserve China. It is what brought Jews back to Israel in the first place, and also at the heart of what concerns Arabs and Palestinians about the Israeli state. Jews often trace their nationhood back to the biblical kingdoms of David and Solomon, circa 950 BC. Modern Zionism, building on the long-standing Jewish yearning for a return to Zion, began in the 19th century. This time period when nationalism started to rise in Europe. A secular Austrian Jewish theorist, Theodor Herzl, turned the Jewish nationalism into an international movement in around 1896. Theodor witnessed brutal European anti-Semitism firsthand and became convinced that the Jewish people could never survive outside of a country of their own. He wrote essays and organized meetings that spurred mass Jewish emigration from Europe to what's now Israel or Palestine. Before Herzl, about 20,000 Jews lived there. By the time Adolf Hitler came into power in Germany, the number was about 8 times this. That is, it rose to 160,000 Jews. Though Zionists all agree that Israelis should exist, they have long disagreed on what its government should look like. In most general terms, the Zionist left, which dominated the country's politics until the late 1970s, is inclined to trade Israeli-controlled land for peace with Arab nations, want more government intervention in the economy, and prefer a secular government over a religious one. The Zionist right is someone who enjoys commanding positions in the Israeli government and has a popular opinion. It tends to be more skeptical of the land for peace and more liberation on the economy, mixing religion and politics. Arabs and Palestinians generally oppose Zionism as the explicitly Jewish character of the Israeli state means that Jewish have privileges that others don't. For instance, any Jew anywhere in the world can become an Israeli citizen, a right not extended to any other class of person. Arabs often see Zionism as a species of colonialism and racism aimed at appropriating Palestinian land and systematically disfranchising the Palestinians that remain. Arab states actually pushed through a UN General Assembly resolution labeling Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination in 1975, though it was repealed 16 years later in the year 1991. What are the two-state solution and one-state solution? There are two broad ways the Israeli-Palestinian conflict might end. The first is the two-state solution. This would create an independent Israel and Palestine and is the mainstream approach to resolve this conflict. The idea is that Israelis and Palestinians want to run their countries differently. Israelis want a Jewish state and the Palestinians want a Palestinian one. Because neither sides can get what they want in a joint state, the only visible possible solution that will satisfy everyone is to separate the Israelis from the Palestinians. Only then peace can be attained between these two sides successfully. The other proposed solution is something completely in contrast with the first solution, which is the one-state solution. As the name suggests, this solution would merge Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip into one big country. It comes in two versions. One, favored by some leftists and Palestinians, which would create a single democratic country. Arab Muslims would outnumber the Jews, thus ending Israel as a Jewish state. The other version is favored by some rightists and Israelis, which involve annexing the West Bank and either forcing out Palestinians or denying them the right to vote. Virtually, the entire world, including the Zionists, reject this option as an unacceptable human rights violation. Most polling suggests that both Israelis and Palestinians prefer a two-state solution. However, the inability of Israelis and Palestinians to come to two-state terms has led to a recent surge in a one-state solution, partly out of a sense of hopelessness and partly out of a fear that both sides cannot negotiate a two-state solution. A de facto or an e-state outcome will be inevitable. What is Hamas? I mentioned about Hamas earlier in this video. Hamas is a Palestinian Islamist political organization and militant group that has waged war on Israel since the group's founding in 1987, most notably through suicide and rocket bombings. It seeks to replace Israel with the Palestinian state and also governs Gaza independently of the Palestinian Authority. That is all for today's video. Let me know your views in the comment section or drop a DM on my Instagram @theyouth_anchor. Interesting and important points will be raised and questions will be asked in the next video. If you felt important questions were raised and answered, do leave a like, drop a comment and share the video as much as possible. Do subscribe for more interesting talks. The Youth Mouth. Stay safe, stay aware.
Big thank you for being here.